Welcome to this introduction to the course. I'm Nadi. I'm coordinator of the iCULTURE. It's a large European project. I'm coordinating more than just project, but they're all around the same or similar question: how can we use alternative biomass in a sustainable but also profitable way? So, what I'm going to show you today is basically introduction to 5 days lecture online summer school. There was about 10 lectures covering the biomass conversion, product sustainability assessment, future perspective, and communication. With today, I'm going to introduce you to a system overview. Basically, later lectures will go into technical depth. Um, so for the first, we want to talk why at all we are using or we want to look at biorefineries. And the question is, when does a biorefinery or bio-based process become truly sustainable? It's not so obvious. So we have very extensive fossil resources that drive climates and circularity challenges. We know that. We know how oil and gas and what they do to in terms of pollution or CO2. We know how plastic affects. It's all about fossil resource. We want to move to the bio-based resource. So biomass can provide renewable carbon, nutrients, materials, and energy. I'm going to show you how it can be done, but there are challenges that are related to that. If you look at biorefineries, a common biorefinery produces cascade of products, if you want, everything from gas to petrol, to asphalt we're using in the roads, and to insulation of roofs, to home gas, etc. And it made by fractionating, so it's a well-established old process, and we know exactly how to fractionate it and make the cascade product. So you don't only produce gas fuel or, if you want, petrol from oil, crude oil. You produce a range of products. We want to achieve the same, but imagine the challenges we have. And I'm going to only to show you an overview of that. The next few days we'll go more deeper into the whys and how. But let me quantify that. If you have a 1 ton of dry biomass that you see in the picture here, and you want to process only for energy, so much potential chemical and material value will be lost. A cascade approach tries to recover high value fractionated first. You don't want in basically what the today's biorefinery do, most of them. I know at least two, one in Norway and one in Finland, but there are a lot of them in Europe that convert biomass into energy. They make bioethanol. We know that. What you really want to do is achieve the same effect they have in oil refineries, in fossil fuel refineries, crude oil refineries. You want to have a range of products. So basically, replacing fossil carbon is necessary, but not sufficient for sustainability. If you want sustainability, you cannot just convert what I show you here, biomass to energy. You want to have a cascade of products. I'm going to talk about that soon. Look at these challenges we have. The crude oil I've showed you before, and this you can see in this image, is highly energy dense and standardized. It's been used for more than 100 years. We know exactly how to fractionate it. The biomass is wet. It's heterogeneous. It's not the same. It's seasonal and compositionally variable. Look at this, for example, the contrast between what you get from crude oil and how this, what you see is macroalgae. It's a wet biomass. You need to remove the water. You have a lot of challenges. It has wet macroalgae may contain about 80 to 90% water. So logistics and drying dominates many process decisions that you don't have the problem in oil refineries. So there are tons of challenges, and I'm going to mention the most important ones when you convert biomass to energy. And not only to energy. I mean, that's energy is only one part. You have loss of habitat and deforestation. So it's known that if you want now to replace the fossil fuel, for example, with wood or process from pulp, you want to cut or deforest. You cut the wood and make it out to energy. Well, this is a loss of habitat. This is if you want damage to the environment. My follower, Professor Olivier, is going to talk about the natural habitation and how it is affected by biorefineries. And then you have the question about carbon neutrality. Is it really carbon neutral? I'm going to talk about that and show you why. Air pollution when biomass is burned. So some of the processes use part of the biomass in the cascade and burn it to make maybe energy by steam engines. So basically, it's driving turbines, steam turbines to produce electricity out of the energy you get from burning biomass, but that's polluting the air. It's competing with food production. For example, take the corn and the soy that is converted to ethanol. Well, it's competing with food for humans, and we know that the food becoming scarce with the years. It's not going to get better. Cost and efficiency of harvesting, transport, processing is very demanding. And when it's high, you start trying to get alternatives, which may impact the profitability and sustainability. So when I'm showing you here the challenges, they are related both to money and environment. It's not only environment. Now, when it comes to the definition of biorefineries, you have is an integrated system that converts biomass into multiple products. You can look at food feed ingredients, chemicals, materials, fuel, energy, and residual valorization stream. Because to make the high value product is not enough. You want to have what we call zero waste. Basically, you want to use the entire biomass and convert it to whatever you can to increase the value as much as you can. An example, I can give you brown seaweed, which we are looking at in our project, which can be fractionated into alginate, which is a high value product. This is using in food and in gels to make gelatin, for example, but not more than that. Not only gelatin. Fucoidan and laminarin rich streams, which are basically sugars, minerals, and then fermentation substrates and residual fertilizers and energy fractionate. So you can use the brown seaweed to a range of products, but it comes with challenges. And the product value can differ by orders of magnitude. Imagine from high value ingredients, you need to justify on terms of money the cost of your process. Let me show you what I mean. If you look at the process here, the biomass value chain is quite, I would say, demanding. Let me. It starts with the biomass. When you have the cultivation or collection and then harvesting, it requires the energy. And then you need to store it. And then you need to pre-treat it. So you can say a lot of this is similar to what you see in oil on the crude oil industry. But here you have far deeper challenges because I'm not oil expert, but storage of biomass can be very challenging, especially because biomass can ferment if it's in different conditions than the optimal conditions of dryness, of what you mix with each other, etc. And not all the biomass are dry, like you see in the picture here. Imagine the algae is a very wet biomass, and if you take a bucket of algae and put it in your lab or in a room, after 2 days it's completely fermented and usually degrade, so it's useless. So storage can be a very challenging aspect and expensive as well. And then you have the pre-treatment. Then you have extraction and conversion. This is exactly where you want your product to merge out of the biomass. And then you need to separate it because sometimes you want the product to be not pure as possible. You want to separate things you don't want, especially if you're using cascade extraction. So because you want to have the alginate first, for example, and then with Kuidan, which is another type of sugar, second, and then you need to separate them. And separation usually is a very expensive process, especially at large scales, but also in a lab. And then you have a range of products you want to get. So sometimes you start with products and you ask which, if I want to get these products, for example, because I have customers, which biomass can I use and what shall I look for to extract this typical product. But a lot of the times, and you're going to hear tomorrow and the day after, people ask the reverse question. I have this type of biomass. For example, I have the algae. I have the brown algae, Laminaria digitata. What can I do with it? How can I profit the maximum out of this biomass? So how can I fractionate it to the highest possible value? So you go to do a kind of analysis to examine what you have inside. And then you start designing this exact process, how to extract and how to separate it. And then you come up with logistic challenges and solutions to them, how to store it, how to pre-treatment it. And then you also have, of course, have to ask, what do I do with the rest of the material? This is what we are dealing with also in our project iCULTURE. After I extracted this product, I usually left with a lot of waste. Not necessarily waste. You can make waste out of gold, waste to gold. The question is, how do I turn the residuals, these remains, after the extraction of the product, into something valuable? For example, soil amendment, when you can enrich the soil with nitrogen, or to make a bioenergy, or animal bedding and other uses. I mean, there is plenty of ideas there, and some of the biorefineries are actually active. So then you have the question of conventional versus bio-based refinery system. So conventional biorefineries optimize fuel carbon throughput. Sustainable biorefinery must optimize carbon, nutrients, water, energy, biodiversity, and economy together. So it's you cannot just separate it. The biorefinery needs to think about the whole, it's a kind of a holistic, uh, the whole entire box. And the question is where you put these, if you want, boundaries of the box. Shall I only look at the biomass itself and disregard how it affects the environment? What's happened if I harvest it? The biodiversity? What's happened, for example, to the fish when I harvest the brown algae? Do they are they affected? The blue shells, the other, there is a tons of different animals that live from the biomass. So it's a bit different than cultivation of corn and then just to harvest it. But also have to understand the biodiversity. It's not only about um, having a kind of, if you want, big fields of corn or sugar cane where you can harvest. They are replacing very often where there used to be forests or natural habitats of other animals because people want to grow whatever profits them most. So you can see the effect what's happening in the Amazon where people are deforesting in order to grow, if you want, valuable crops for them. So biodiversity is a very important part of it. So when you want to design sustainable biorefineries, you want to optimize not just the content of your biomass, but also how much energy you use in the process, how much water, how is the biodiversity affected by that, and what is the economy? How will the process affect your economy? How is it? How much is going to cost on total? On total, I mean from the beginning, including the transport of the biomass, the storage itself, the process, the energy it takes, and sometimes the destruction of the waste you are generating, or if you want filters, um, they're all part of a system you need to think about, which is not common in conventional biorefineries. So if you if you can imagine just a quantified anchor, even 90 or 95% solvent recovery. So sometimes some of the biomass use solvent. So you have organic solvent, it can be ethanol, for example, is using to extract some material. I know ethanol is used to extract from rosemary, or if you want to extract from or, from olives or olives leaves, you're using ethanol for this extraction. And then to make it more sustainable and profitable, you recover the ethanol. But you cannot always recover 100%. So even 90% recovery, even 95% solvent recovery can become important when solvent volumes are large. So imagine 95% of many cubic meter, huge, large amount of volumes become significant amount. So you need to think of the scales itself. So biorefinery has a lot of challenges. Also in scale, the larger it is, the bigger the challenges are. Let me give an example of lignocellulose. So it contains cellulose. It comes from wood. So basically, it's a process where you turn wood into um, lignocellulose, but it's a cellulose, hemicellulose, lignin. Lignin is the fibers, and extractives, ash, and moisture. So it contains large amount of material that you can use for your benefit, and they are well established. Macroalgae contains polysaccharides, minerals, proteins, pigments, and salt and water. You can all use these to have a really interesting cascade if you know how to design it. So typically, lignocellulosic biomass contains about 30 to 35, 35 to 50 cellulose, 20% hemicellulose, and 15% lignin on a dry basis. So you need pre-treatment. It's very important. They are central. They are not optional. So there are several major platforms of biomass um, in biorefineries. Lignocellulose is one of the biggest. It's a quite large one. You create um, everything from enzyme. You can organic acid. You can have biofuel, biochemical, bioplastic. Lignin is very important. For example, they add lignin into concrete to reinforce the concrete. If you ever use cement for floors, they all fiber added. This is usually the lignin. You can have different sugars from this. There is a lot of product streams. Even vanillin, if you make cakes and you're using the vanillin powder, it's very often come from lignocellulose process, not from the original vanillin natural extract. That's why it's so relatively cheap. It's not that it's worse, it's just different. But chemically, it's the same vanillin, L-vanillin. So this is a very large process. There is one big refinery in Norway. It's called Borregaard. The other ones are agricultural residual platforms. They are very famous. They are usually the one that makes everything from acids and additives to animal feed, etc. And you have the macro and micro algae platforms that usually have that extract things like alginate, um, proteins, pigments, etc., vitamins from marine biomass. So when it comes to lignocellulose, it's the example of the biomass is wood, straw, grass, and forestry residual. It's rich in cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. It's abundant. You can find it at least in the north of the hemisphere, but also in the south. Wherever you have wood and trees, you can, in theory, establish a lignocellulose biorefinery, but often required intensive pre-treatment and careful logistics. So it's an expensive process. The agriculture, it's straw, husk, shells, pomace, pruning residuals like pruning of olive wood trees, and processing side stream. They can reduce waste and create regional circular value chains. And competing uses, seasonality and soil nutrient removal must be considered because Season in plants are a very important factor. Some plants have some nutrient you want to extract, but only at certain time in the year. For example, macroalgae is very common. In the winter, it has completely different composition than in the summer, and it's radically different. It's You have some materials you almost don't find in seaweed in the winter that you can find abundant in the summer. So seasons are very important, and it's only in supply not only for seaweed but also for every biomass. When it comes to macroalgae, do not require arable land. It's very important. You don't need place to grow them. I mean, you need the sea, but not land. You don't need freshwater irrigation, which is also very important, and that's why it's very attractive if you establish a good value chain in countries like Africa, which don't have the resources to establish a very large biorefinery. Examples of kind of masses are brown seaweed, red seaweed, and green macroalgae provide polysaccharides, minerals, proteins, pigments, phenolic, and other bioactive compounds. Imagine the wet macroalgae contains roughly 89% water. It's a lot of water you need to remove. The dry matter composition can vary strongly with species, season, and locations. So that's what is true for dry biomass, or in land biomass is even more profound in marine biomass. Um, but there is a lot of opportunity there. Although the water is challenging, you don't need, as I said, you don't need land to grow them. The sea is available as for now, and you don't need fresh water, which is very important in many countries. Um, Marine logistics and ecosystems effect must be considered. So there are a lot of opportunities in macroalgae. It's fast growing. It's fast growing is almost 4 times faster than um, regular crops in the land, like corn. Um, you have different opportunity. You can extract high value hydrocolloids, for example, or bioactives. Bioactives is any material that has a activity like killing microbial, which is antimicrobials. That's a bioactive. Vitamins, for example. So you want to extract them first and then use the remaining carbohydrates for fermentation, fertilizer, or energy. This is how you get the zero waste idea. As a challenge example, you have high salt and ash content that can interfere with fermentation. So you want to ferment this macroalgae, but the high salt is not always good for microbial fermentation. Any bacteria or yeast will suffer greatly from high salt concentration, and usually they die. So you will need to do something with the salt, which is the pre-treatment we talked about. Thermal conversion is a problem. You need if you want to use it with heat because it's high water content. There is a corrosion and downstream purification problem because the high salt will also create corrosion. If you try to move salt water in pipes, you understand what I'm talking about. And then you have the downstream purification, which is also a big problem because downstream purification is very um, dependent on the amount of substance you have inside. And if the protein amount, for example, if you want to extract protein from seaweed and it's too low, the downstream purification process becomes very fast, very expensive. So if it competes with chemical alternatives, then it's not going to be profitable. So this is something to consider when you want to design your biorefinery or to consider a biorefinery option. And another example, ash can be a major fraction of dry seaweed biomass. Values are about 15 to 40% of dry weight, a commonly teaching range depending on species and washing. So ash is all the minerals that are left when you extract, if you remove the water and the carbohydrates, and that can present a challenge. You want to design a hierarchy. Hierarchy is basically you want to have a kind of a from a high value, I want to extract what costs most money first, and then have a kind of a cascade effect where I'm left in the end with what cost least. Why? Because usually you can terminate the process when it's convenient to you, or you can actually um, take out the most valuable product first, and then as the process goes, if it's not effective, it gets destroyed and it gets into waste. And usually, when you want to extract the high value, you start with pharmaceutical, of course, that's where the pay is most. Drug intermediates, active ingredients, this is the bioactive, um, um, if you want materials, you want to extract. And then you have the vitamins, dietary supplement, and functional ingredients. They are the one that pays after. And then specialty chemicals, fine chemicals, for example, colors for biotech companies, um, performance chemicals, flavors and fragrance, most of the perfumes we are using, personal care ingredients, so actives, emolites, and bio-based actives, everything from skin aging to special soap, even the smell in the soap, but also the soap itself. And then high value byproducts, enzymes, probiotic, and biosurfactants. So we took a short expedition in the lab, just to give you an example. In during January, we went up to, I think, the most northern company in the world in Tromsø, that produces enzymes, and the of amount of enzyme they produce is quite tiny. Well, I'm talking about a few dozens of grams of enzymes, which create a turnover of about 11 million euros. So you can imagine how much this product costs. Of course, you don't. It's not easy to extract the enzymes. That's why they are so expensive. But the opportunities are there. So you want to first extract these, and then go down to materials and ingredients, which are costless. They are less expensive. The market price are far less, but they are still very useful. And this is what we use usually in food and feed of animals, both food for humans and feed for animals. Antioxidant fibers, plant proteins and peptides, amino acids, etc. And then in the end, you want to be left with bulks. So whatever you can convert the remaining waste into energy or into biogas or to make heat, that will create the zero waste we talked about. Um, so a very important concept, and you're going to hear it in the next few days, is that the process is not sustainable just because the feedstock is renewable. It's not enough that the tree can grow again in 20 years if the transport, the harvesting, the cultivation is destroying a lot of the environment around. And the transport costs a lot of energy. It doesn't matter if you can produce few kilojoule out of wood if the transport of the wood takes the 10 kilojoules. So you didn't do anything. Worst, if the transport actually cost, or the energy of the transport cost more than actually the value you get out. That's why these kind of cascades are very important, because you can always justify that first you are extracting from biorefineries materials that otherwise you cannot use, or you can produce from chemicals that are really harming. And the best example I can give you, or one of the examples I can give you, is indigoidine. As if you know, most of us uses jeans, and they're blue jeans, and the color blue in the indigo color that you use for the jeans is highly toxic. Today it's produced from um, gas, from natural gas, components from natural gas that fractionated. Among them, there is also cyanide that is used in a process that costs tons of water for every few grams of indigo that is produced to color our jeans. This is a chemical process that is highly harming, and it's well discussed. And we know that genes are one of the polluters, because it produces in such a big quantities, and the process is also comes from chemical process from harming materials. One example, you can convert this in this indigo color into indigo indene if you just replace this chemical process with the biorefinery one that you can produce from bacteria. So you take bacteria. There are several bacteria now today that can produce indigoidine, and you can feed them with natural material, and they produce you the color you want. Now, the problem with that is the scales. If the scales were proper, people would use it a long time ago. But the problem is that today the chemical process is still profitable. But that's an example of opportunity that is not there. Um, so you want also to quantify things like changing the system boundaries can change the conclusion. For example, is this conversion to make this vitamin from this seaweed, is it going to be profitable? Is it going to be sustainable? Is it going to be profitable and sustainable? The solution is where you put the boundaries. So very often there is something that called gate to gate or cradle to grave reveals cultivation logistic burdens. You're going to hear it in the next lectures from Theo Crit, that are expert in the environment and how to make these boundaries. And you can prepare this. This prepares to LCA. This is life cycle analysis, functional units, system boundaries, and impact categories. They're all important in concluding whether your, if you want your system or your biorefinery you want to design will be sustainable and will be profitable. Typical sustainability trade-offs are offshore cultivation versus onshore. So offshore cultivation may avoid land, but may affect marine ecosystems and require marine infrastructure. Another example I can give you that is well discussed today, also in my project. If you decided to use seaweed in your biorefinery, what would it be the best? Where can you get the seaweed in quantities that will both be profitable for you, but also good for the environment? So one thing, you can cultivate them, but then you need designated area in the sea, and then you need licenses from the country you want to cultivate them, and you need to do it in quantities that will be profitable. The alternative is to harvest the seaweed if you know where they grow, and usually we do know if we aim to a certain seaweed type, for example, laminaria, we know exactly where they grow in Norway or in Northern Europe, but laminaria also grows elsewhere in the world, in Canada, in Chile, in South America, it grows also in Asia, in Australia. So the question is, what would be best, to cultivate it or to harvest it? Another example of a trade-off is high extraction yield might require chemical, heat, and solvent that increase environmental burden. So imagine if you want to extract a certain material, for example, an flavonoid or a carotenoid from a certain plant, you can use it with water. Then it's going to be water waste. Norway is very common, have a lot of no water available because it's raining here all the time. And the same we can say about Canada, but many rare areas in the world have a scarcity of water. So water is not always an option. And I'm talking about a large amount of water. So the question is, can we use solvent? And usually the solvent will be, the answer is what do you want to extract? So if you want to extract something that is require solvent, can be very efficient, but also then it's not always environmentally friendly. And some of the solvents are highly toxic. Not everything, like ethanol, is not toxic. Bioethanol is not toxic, but you have solvents that are so in both explosive and dangerous for humans. So you can see people going with masks into it's like a special gas masks and safety equipment into the reactor area. So a 10% yield increase is not automatically better if it requires a much larger increase in energy or solvent use. So the question is of yields, how do I improve it? All of this has to go into consideration when you want to design a biorefineries. This is things you're going to hear from the companies that are going to talk in the next few days. So you need a system thinking. So you need to think about the biomass, the logistics. The logistics are a big part of it, although it's easy to disregard it. I can see it from my students when they want to design a specific mass value chain. And then you have the pre-treatment, which can be highly expensive. And then you have the conversion extraction, which is what most of the company use the most of the time. How do I extract from the plant material, which solvent do I use, whether it's water or organic solvent, and what kind of product can I get for them? And more importantly, how do I create the cascade I explained to you about of material from the fine chemicals that cost a lot of money and I can sell them for high price down to the low value materials, which I can use as a biofertilizers. And how do I create the zero waste? Because how do I recycle? What's happening in the end of my value chain? Am I left with something? How do I get rid of it? Can I get rid of it? Is it dangerous to the environment? What I do want is actually to get zero waste, but not always it's possible. So this is something you need to consider how to follow the whole value chain. Every part of this card, if you want, of this a process, every stage can be highly expensive or actually even a game changer or a game killer. So every error has a cost, emission, losses, and uncertainty that you need to take care in to account for. So the design is what you're going to hear in the next few lectures. You're going to hear of different stages of this process. You're going to hear about the environment, how to put it together. And as an example, I'll give you from the iCULTURE, which the concept is actually to take seaweed and look at the extraction. Basically, what can we extract from the seaweed that will give us very good value for the process, and then how do we use the waste material that is left from the extraction, because the waste material is quite high amount and most often you cannot just throw it away. You need license to get rid of it, and it costs money. And in fact, a lot of the waste material is not really waste. You can create value out of it. So this is what the iCULTURE project is doing. It takes the residual material after the seaweed was processed and extracted and examine how we can make fermentation products out of it using AI and advanced, if you want, bioprocess methods. And it's an holistic way to think because we are both looking at the process itself of making money, if you want, and do it in the most sustainable way, but also how to do it in a responsible way such that we don't damage biodiversity. This is the next lecture you're going to hear from Olivier. So today we're going to talk about how biomass and macroalgae supply. Olivier is an expert in macroalgae, and where it can be. It can be harvested or cultivated, cultivation versus harvesting, and what type of macroalgae, what do they have? And the next days 2 and 4, develop conversion products and microbial platforms and LCA. You're going to hear about what kind of products we can get from macroalgae, for marine harvesting, and how what kind of microbial platforms. You're going to hear from Professor Christian Riedel. He's an expert in microbial platform making, designing cell factories, basically bacteria that can consume parts of the algae. And you're going to address future perspective in day 5, policy, markets, and communication, which is a big part. Because imagine you can have unexpected challenges. Even if you found a biomass that is highly beneficial and you know it's invasive or even have damaging the environment because it's blooming in ways that it's um, flood the shores in big amounts, maybe the policy of the countries you're in, we are in Europe, and we know that we cannot use invasive species in Europe to create these valuable products we want to create because they're called invasive. Because they're called invasive, so there are policies that prevent us to use that in bioprocess. And these policies would either need to take them into account or to try to change them if we think it's going to be environmentally and profitable, beneficial. So what's the take-home message? So biorefineries are integrated system. They're not isolated technology. You have to look through the whole value chain I talked about. The logistic, the pre-treatment, conversion, extraction, the product, the residual streams, and take care that in the end you will not have anything. And you have to have buyers and buyers for all the products you want, and you have to have suppliers of the biomass. You have to have enough biomass so this will flow continuously, not just that in January and February, for example, you will not be able to have the biomass because the material you want to extract doesn't exist in January and February in the biomass. So you need a continuous flow of material. So you will need as a kind of a supply chain is very important. Bio-based does not automatically mean sustainable. Not if you are destroying large part of biodiversity or when you're harvesting the seaweed and you kill a lot of fish in the process, or if the transport with boats or with trucks doesn't qualify that as sustainable, or if you want to use a lot of fresh water and this is damaging the environment because then you have to take the fresh water from another places. And macroalgae biorefineries need system design, sustainability assessment, and realistic scale up. The scale up is a very important part. I told you it's about the scales. One thing is to make things in the lab. Another thing is actually producing it in large amount of tons. We're talking about 100 to 500 tons a day. And then this is considered still small scale compared to many of the processes that companies are using. So the discussion questions you're going to ask yourself and going to hopefully answer in this course is which product pathway should macroalgae biorefinery prioritize? Fuels, materials, high value chemicals, food and feed, and residual valorization. Imagine if you can answer this after the course, you are halfway there. It means you will have enough tools to understand when it's better to make materials, when better to make fuels, high value chemicals, etc. How would your answer change if biomass availability, market price, and environmental impact become the limiting factor? Because it's not always about your biomass. Sometimes it's about the market and the market demands and needs. So if the market needs change, does it affect do you need to close down your company? Or you can just make small modifications to adjust for these market needs. And the same with the environmental impact. And with this, I will close. And thank you for for listening. And if you have questions, please do.
Thank you, Professor. Uh, you can use the chat to ask any question you might have.
Yeah, go ahead. Any question you have about the process, about the design, it's just introduction course, introduction lecture if you want. So the people tomorrow and the day after are going to go deep into each aspect you've seen in the figures.
May I?
Yes, Dale, please do.
So I think we have here a lot of young researchers, and I'm sure they are curious to because they would like to invest their future on certain, let's say, promising applications for the future. This is, I think, very common for all students. So, if you would like to make some comments about what you consider among your presentation the most hot topics for young researchers, what a young researcher would like maybe to invest for the future. Some comments. Thank you.
Yeah, good comment. Thank you, Theo. Let me share with you the screen so I can show you again the process. Um, I guess you can see that. I mean, in this figure of the green energy, if you want, from biomass, or the figure I'm showing here for the whole value chain, you can enter this. So, for the first, I do think it's the future, because the future of fossil fuel, we know it's depleting, but also we see from recent war we have how large it can impact the global demand and supply. Um, we all know that by the fuel prices we've seen in the street, but I do think it's a future because it's contained a lot of diversity of material that we can extract, and they are natural, usually natural products. They're not synthetically made; they're made out of plants. So we know they are also, a lot of them are really considered health material, good to promote health. You can enter the process as a student if you go to study almost every part of this. If you want to go to extraction, conversion, and separation, usually it's chemical engineering. And the same I will say with pre-treatment. But when it comes to separation of products, you can also enter it through biotechnology. Residual use is usually environmental study, environmental engineering. You are very focused on residual use, but you can also enter this from chemical engineering and from biotechnology as well. Depends what kind of residual use you're using, you're focusing on. Storage and harvesting, usually storage is logistics, and but you can say the same on this part as well, part 4, 5, and 6. If you study logistics and business administration, you may end up, if you're interested in biorefinery or the future of um, material manufacturing, the storage and transport and harvesting will be part of your education, and you can focus on that as well. And when it comes to biomass cultivation collections, you can enter that from biology perspective. So you can cover from biotechnology to chemical engineering, logistic, biology, and environmental engineering. And there is more for that. There is things you don't see in the figure, like monetary values, money. So you can enter this from economy as well, from design. So there is plenty of interest. Depends what do you want to focus on. So my students were chemical engineering. We're not only focusing, we're not actually focusing on this scale you see here. We have laboratory and we're focusing on small scale, which looks prettier as well. But it's also focused on material conversion, how to extract, how to convert, how to separate as well. It goes into very high, I would say, skill demanding. Separation is chromatography sometimes. You need use beads and nanoparticle to separate molecule from each other, so you can have um, pure substances instead of just, if you want, unpure or low quality substances. Does it answer your question, Tell? Okay, so any other questions?
Yeah. There are some in the chat if
Mm-hmm.
you have
Oh,
some more
I can
time.
do
Hi.
that. One question is, as a master student of marine sciences, what skill should I focus mainly for securing good career in the field? So when it comes to marine sciences, depends on what you study. If you study biotechnology in marine science, we have marine science is a big topic in our university. If you're in the biotechnology part, so you can focus on products. Marine science can be also what you're going to hear next from Olivier. So basically, habitats, a type of different seaweed you have, macroalgae and microalgae, and then you're going to focus on this biomass part rather than the extraction process himself. But don't forget that it's very flexible. If you're in marine science in general, you can easily end up in any of the stages you've seen of the biorefinery process. So that's good news because you can actually converge to something you actually like. Um, and I have another question from Samara. Thinking about red algae, which compounds will be the easiest, cheapest to extract to produce product input? This is highly technical question. So not necessarily, I'm not expert in red algae, in fact, although we do use red algae, but not that as particular species you are referring to. Um, But to know that, you will need to analyze the red algae to understand the exact what you have inside. We do that in our lab with other type of, usually with brown algae, using GCMS, we're using mass spec to understand the content and many other type of analysis. And then you can decide. And after you know what you have inside the red algae, you can decide the quantity you have. Is it um, is it sustainable? Is this quantity can be supplied in big amounts so you can actually extract what you want to extract? And after that, how do you do the cascade extraction? So yeah, that's the questions I've seen. Any other questions?
There is another one from.
Yeah, about biopolymers. In terms of biomass valorization, I didn't take all the biomass valorization possible. I mean, you can have more than just fine chemicals. My laboratory is specialized in fine chemicals, so of course I'm a bit biased, but I know laboratories, my colleagues, that they are producing biopolymers, bioplastics, sustainable plastic. I mean, the amount of products you can get from biomass is enormous. So I don't know if there is a limit. In fact, there's probably a limit, but it's just the limit is comes from the amount of biomass we can harvest. So apologies if I did not focus on a specific biomass or product, but there are just to give you an examples of what we can do with them.
Thank you very much for the insightful introduction to biorefineries.